My name is Andy Z. I'm the spokesperson for Revolution Books. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. Rise up and get into the streets and unite with people everywhere to build up the resistance in every way that you can. And don't stop. Don't conciliate. Don't accommodate. And don't collaborate. That is the title of an article that we posted on revcom.us this week. It's also an important directive, not just for revolutionaries, but for everyone. This is a time that's going to demand a lot of courage and a lot of delving into what is the actual situation. It's going to be a time when we have to cast away illusions about the society we live in and what is to come. And we're going to have to prepare right now for a great deal of struggle. What's coming and what is on its way is not pretty. Yet there is potential in this situation to stop it and also to wrest out a different future. Now, we call this emergency forum. It's going to be kind of in one sense, we're both going to give informal talks and try to have a discussion with all of you, even as there's a lot of us here tonight on this topic. But first, I want to actually, with your permission, take a few minutes to talk about where you are and why that matters. As I said, I am the spokesperson for Revolution Books. I want you all, in thinking about what drove you here tonight, this afternoon, looking at this Trump presidency, about what this store is and why it matters. And for those of you who haven't been here before, this is for you, but it's even just as much for those of you who are on the staff of Revolution Books and have been supporters of the store and patrons of the store. This bookstore is the political and the intellectual and the cultural center of a movement for an actual revolution. It's a bookstore that's about the world and for a radically new world. It's a place where people come from all over the world to get into what is the problem humanity faces and what is the solution. You've heard me say this many, many times. But in looking at the reality of a Trump presidency, the import of a place where people are seriously getting into what it is that we face and what is to be done should stand out in stark relief. This is a place where we engage with a lot of different trends and a lot of philosophy, of art, of politics, over how did we get where we are right now? Why are we standing on the precipice of the destruction of the planet, let alone the evisceration of rights that people have come to see and expect in this country, even as this country marauds around the world, destroying lives and crushing spirits of people from one end of the globe to the other, including right here in the belly of the beast, as was said in the 1960s. We talk about here, is revolution possible? Why is it possible? Why is it necessary? What should it be? How could we win? And what is a new society? And at the core of this engagement is a new synthesis of communism and the leadership of Bob Avakian, which most of all is a scientific approach to probing reality as it actually is, and doing so with wide arms At the heart of this scientific method is a process called solid core with a lot of elasticity on the basis of that solid core. The solid core is that we understand at this store, and we try to impart this to people while talking with people about why it is this system does what it does over and over and over again to people, and what it is that can be done. And yet we do that in a way that's inclusive in terms of talking to people and then struggling over, are we right? Do we have the solutions? What can we learn from the great diversity of human thought and artistic achievement and scientific endeavor? So that's what goes on here, and it matters now more than ever. The stakes are really great. And I have to say to you that the future of this store does still hang in the balance. And that's where you come in. I'm going to talk more about this later. We were about to embark, and we're still going to embark, on a month of fundraising, of sales, of benefits, and that's still going to happen. And celebration. On November 15th, 2 days from now, is the first anniversary of Revolution Books in Harlem. And we're going to kick off that month on December 2nd, Friday night, with a concert by the great Grammy Award-winning pianist and composer and band leader Arturo Faro of the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra and his quartet. So we'll talk to you more about that and this celebration. But now, this takes place in a different context. This takes place in the context of the beginning of a fascist America that we must stop. And so we're also beginning tonight 65 days of programming on fascism. What is it? What is this Trump presidency? How do we understand fascism? What are the roots of this in America? How do we confront the fact that the huge majority of white people voted for him? What's wrong with white people? Well, at one point we said nothing that a good revolution couldn't cure, and that's true, but we actually have to get into this situation very, very seriously. And over the next month, the next 65 days till what? The inauguration, we are going to have programming here. Sometimes it'll just be a small discussion. 5 or 6 people come in to talk about a topic with Carl Dix or myself or Raymond Latta or other people. We're going to have guest speakers, authors. The cartoonist Ted Rall today wrote me and said, "I'll come speak." He wrote a book on Trump a while back. So he'll be here. We're going to have a lot of people into the store over the next month. It's very, very important that people understand what is happening and what is to be done about it. So that's my opening on the role of Revolution Books. Now, I'm going to say a couple words about the theme of the program. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. Then Carl's going to talk for a little while. And then I'm going to talk for a little while, we hope, or maybe not. But then we're going to have an open discussion about this, and we're going to try and do this all by 6 or 6:30. So I want to begin with something from the New York Times. It said, several reliable, well-informed sources confirmed the idea that Trump's anti-Muslim rhetoric and anti-immigrant program was not so genuine or violent as it sounded, and that he was merely using this anti-immigrant propaganda as bait to catch the masses of followers and keep them aroused, enthusiastic, and in line for the time when his presidency is off and running and sufficiently powerful to be employed effectively for its political purposes. A sophisticated politician credited Trump with particular political cleverness for laying emphasis and overemphasis on anti-immigrant feelings, saying, "You can't expect people to understand or appreciate your finer real aims. You must feed the masses with masses with cruder morsels and ideas than anti-Muslim feeling. It would be politically all wrong to tell them the truth about where you are really leading them." So this article was published, as some of you may have recognized it, on November 21st, 1922. But what it actually said is several reliable, well-informed sources confirmed the idea that Hitler's anti-Semitism was not so genuine or violent as it sounded, and that he was merely using anti-Semitic propaganda as a bait to catch the masses of followers and keep them aroused, enthusiastic, and in line for the time when his organization is perfected and sufficiently powerful to be employed effectively for political purposes. You get the point. There are a lot of people telling you right now, that's just campaigning. Don't worry. Let's get in there and work with him. Wish him success. This is a very, very wrong and dangerous trajectory. Okay, yes, this article was 1922, and it would be 10 years before Hitler was elected to the parliament and then named chancellor in a coalition government. And even then, such articles appeared in the mainstream press. You could say that 24 months is a long time, but between 1932 and 1934, it was a world of change. And then between 1934 and 1939, the horrific consequences began to become apparent, even as many of the mainstream press ignored the reality of what was being done to the Jewish people. So look, this is really, really serious. I have something else here that I wanted to read. Maybe, oh, here it is. I don't know, many of you maybe saw it today. Well, how many know the play by Ionesco, Rhinoceros? Okay, well, maybe some of you saw that Teju Cole wrote a column about this today. And spoiler, no spoiler, I'm not going to tell you about the play. Read the column. And then, hopefully at Revolution Books we have Ionesco and you can buy the book. But the point of the matter is what I was just reading, that the play is people accommodating themselves to a great horror. And I just want to read something from the end of this article. Here. On August 19th, 2015, shortly after midnight, the brothers Stephen and Scott Leader assaulted Guillermo Rodriguez. Rodriguez had been sleeping near a train station in Boston. The Leader brothers beat him with a metal pipe, breaking his nose and bruising his ribs and calling him a wetback. They urinated on him. All these illegals need to be deported, they are said to have declared during the attack. The brothers were fans of the candidate who would go on to win the Republican Party's presidential nomination. Told of the incident at the time, that candidate said, "People who are following me are very passionate. They love this country, and they want this country to be great again." Now these forces are unleashed, and you've not seen but the beginning of it. So, again, this is serious. Hitler, you know, okay, it's not an exact analogy, but it's more exact than you think. A lot of people say, oh, Hitler, he didn't have any coherent, Trump, he has no coherent ideology, he contradicts himself all the time, and they said the same thing about Hitler. But actually, if you read the book, The Nazi Conscience by Claudia Kuntz, which if we don't carry now, we will get back in stock very soon, she makes the point that there actually is a coherent ideology, and in fact, a very strong sense of morality for the Volk, for a section of people who didn't view the gypsies, the Jews, as human beings, and all kinds of other people, including people of disabilities. And you can start seeing Trump in all of this. And this is all very real. But then there's a trajectory that this goes down that created tremendous, tremendous horrors. You know, you hear in the campaign and in these people's words in the streets, they say it's us, meaning Americans, against them, meaning the immigrants, the Muslims, virtually anybody who stands against it, the environmentalists, the elites. But really, when push comes to shove, their program is us without them. That's where it leads. That's why the threats are not just idle threats, if you follow my drift on this. So here's what we're going to do. As I said, the next period, over the next 65 days, we're going to be getting into fascism, its roots, trajectory, lessons from the struggle against it, the implications for wrenching something far better out of this situation, the need and the basis to, at the same time that we want millions of people to be taking this up and are very heartened by the initial protests, the size, the scope, the militance of them. That has to continue in many different forms. At the same time as that, we are also dead set on building a movement for an actual revolution and getting the relationship between these two things in the right way. And I just want to say to the revolutionaries in the room, it really matters that you unite very broadly with people to fight against this fascist America. No, you should not say what you're for and organize a movement for an actual revolution. You should and you must, and if you don't do that, and I'm going to talk more about this later, then the world will go on. We do not want to go back to the world of November 7th with police killing people at the rate of 3 a day. We do not want to go back to the record-setting deportations of the Obama administration, but we have to grasp the difference between that and what's coming. And there's millions of people who want to stop that. We have to unite with them. That's what this statement is about. This is a statement that we believe everyone in this room could take out to all of their friends. Now, we'd also like you to take out the pamphlet, How We Can Win an Actual Revolution. But if you're not ready to do that or you don't agree with it, okay, take this out right now, and we're going to have to put a stop to this. So I wanted to begin with that, and then move on to have Carl speak, and then I'm going to speak a little bit later on a few points. So once again, welcome to Revolution Books. It's under extreme circumstances, but that's why we have a Revolution Books, where we mean both parts of our name. So join me in welcoming Carl Dix, who writes for Revolution newspaper. He was a founding member of the Revolutionary Communist Party, founder of the Stop Mass Incarceration Network with Dr. Cornel West.
Okay, I want to thank Andy for that introduction. And you are where you need to be this afternoon as a prelude to getting out into the streets or back into the streets, because we have to refuse to accept this fascist America. And look, let's just be real clear. A fascist got elected president. Now, I know that there are people who are saying, well, now wait a minute, Carl. Shouldn't we give him a chance? Shouldn't we see what he's going to do now that he's elected? Or people saying, well, he made nice with Obama in the White House. Doesn't that show that maybe he could change? People saying that are playing you, have been played, and are playing themselves. Because look, Trump has already made clear what he represents. I mean, starting with that ride down the escalator at some point in 2015, probably even in the summer of 2015, when he gets off the escalator and he talks about Mexicans being rapists and criminals. Moves on to talk about banning Muslims from entering the country. Talks about being the law and order president. Brags about sexually assaulting women, demeaning and degrading them, and all of the rest. He was letting you know, this was the basis he rallied forces around, and he was laying out, this is what I stand for, this is what's to come. And then you got to think about those rallies. I mean, and there's the Republican National Convention that they had, which speaker after speaker channeled Germany in the 1930s with their fascist crap. But also just the rallies he held all around the country. I'd look at some of those and I'd say, damn, this reminds me of the stories of the lynchings that some of my older relatives told me when I was a child. About how white people would gather for the festive occasion. They'd bring the whole family. They'd bring a picnic basket. Some of them would even be announced in advance so that everybody knew it was happening and wouldn't miss it. You know, and you look at the violence that happened at it, how protesters got pummeled and physically attacked. This is what the man campaigned on. This is what he was prefiguring, and now it's here. And see, if you question that, let's look at what this means on the ground. Look at it as if you're an immigrant child, a school child, you know. And it already was the case that when you went to school in the morning, you worried about, would your parents be there when you got home? Because the deportations, it ain't like they're going to start with Trump. They were already going on, but he has promised to step them up. And then, even more, you don't even want to go to school because you know that these revved up racists at school are going to want to taunt you with build a wall, chanting this in classrooms, you know, in the lunchroom, in the gym at sporting events. You got students now, high school students, marching through the halls of the school with banners that say Trump, chanting white power. This is what you're going up against. Think about that. Imagine that you're a woman, a Muslim woman, someone who wore the hijab as a sign of your faith. So now you're thinking, can I even go outside? Because it's already the case that women who wear the hijab have been confronted, and I'm not just talking about verbal confrontations. Women have had their hijab snatched off their heads, used to choke them. So you're saying, does this mean I can't go outside, or does this mean I have to stop wearing this hijab, which she sees as a symbol of her faith? This is already happening. Let's say you're a black or brown person. You already know that when you step outside, there's a target on your back. You already know that the police are unleashed to instill this kind of terror. And you've got a president-elect who campaigned on, we need law and order. And you kind of know what that meant. That meant the pigs need to be unleashed to come down on you even harder. Okay. Look, you know that that's what that means. You know that with Giuliani being talked about for some position in the administration, you know, attorney general or some stuff like that, what is that going to mean? A man that presided over the ramping up of police terror. That was his legacy as mayor, and that's what his whole thing is built on. The talk about stop and frisk being reinstituted and spread nationwide, which is really talking about the demonization and criminalization that has already been brought down on black and Latino people, especially the young people, going on steroids, being ramped up. Imagine that you live in a village in Afghanistan or Pakistan, and you've already got concerns about drone strikes, which Obama ramped up. Well, you got a president-elect talking about, I'm going to bomb the shit out of ISIS. And when he says that, he means he's going to bomb the shit out of people in other parts of the world where they've been waging war and having trouble getting things under control. This is all going to be ramped up. This is what the future is going to bring down. You say you're a female. It already was a question of concern to you going out, especially going out at night, going out alone, because you know about the horrific numbers of women who are subject to rape and sexual assault. Well, you just got a guy elected president who bragged about sexually assaulting women. And who talked about that as, oh, that's just locker room talk. Come on, let's not be politically correct. What is going to be unleashed by this kind of shit? What is that going to mean? And look, I'm not here just talking about something that's going to happen in the future, because it has already begun to happen. Some of the things I talked about in high schools, happening in high schools and middle schools, some of them happened a while ago, but in the less than a week since Trump's election, there have been many more such reported things. And a lot of them have been caught on video. So it isn't even just, oh, you're making this stuff up. There it is. There are the white students marching down the hallway with the banner that says Trump, chanting white power. That ain't made up. Neither is the talk about building the wall. This stuff is actually happening. Trump supporters in their pickup trucks in Massachusetts, driving into Wellesley College, sorry, I got that wrong, with their Trump banners threatening students, especially threatening female students, because they're getting what's actually being unleashed here. Saying what they'll be able to do to them when their man gets into the White House. This is already happening, as well as the attacks on women wearing the hijab. And it's not like this just started, but it is being ramped up. This is what this means. This is what this comes down to. And it really does pose a challenge of refusing to accept this. And Andy already mentioned that there are people in the streets all across the country in large numbers, and that's good, but it has to go beyond that. It has to get bigger. It has to be determined. People have to really be determined not to accept this, because it is ugly. It is not something that, oh, well, we've been through worse, so we can ride this out. No, we have to refuse to accept this. We cannot let this go down. Now, let me talk about this. There's a lot of talk about, hey, why did this happen? Is it because there wasn't enough black turnout? We didn't get enough black people to come out and vote for Clinton? Or was it because of the people that voted for the third party? Is that why it happened? Well, look, there is a big flashing light about this, and it tells us something very important. Because look, Trump got elected because a whole shitload of white people voted for him. You know, because people talking about, well, there's this section and that section. One thing that you find as you go through the sections is that on just about every score, white people broke for white people who voted broke for Trump. Some broke way for Trump, some barely broke for Trump, but that's how it basically came down. And that needs to be looked at squarely. That's what came down. That's what happened. Not this other. This is a question to get into. And look, on one end, not surprising. This is America. It was conceived in genocide against the native inhabitants, dragging people from Africa in slave chains. And white supremacy has been built into its framework and fabric. The exact forms that white supremacy took have changed over the centuries, but it has always been there. So large numbers of white people being unleashed behind a campaign with the slogan, "Make America Great Again," which then poses, when did you think America was great? Because it never was. But if you're looking for going back to a way that America was, one of the big themes of that is going to be when white supremacy was less subjected to challenges. So the fact that a number of white people were drawn to that and took that up, not surprising. But this is not something that is written in stone. It is not in the DNA of white people to take that stand. See, and this is not me trying to shine this on. This is reality. I mean, one thing we can look at these demonstrations, and you've got a whole lot of young white people in the street saying, we reject this asshole, and a lot of them are even saying, we reject this fascist asshole, although not so clear they know exactly what fascism is. That's something that's got to be worked on. But there's a lot of young white people in the streets saying, we don't want this. Not nearly enough, but there's a lot, and that's a start and something to be built on. But also, I mean, look, this gray, I come by it honest. I didn't tint it in there. And not only have I been around a while, I've been involved in the movement against the horrors that this system brings down for a while. So I remember some other times. I remember the 1960s, back when I was in the Army, got orders to Vietnam, and trying to figure out what I needed to do. One of the thing that helped me figure out correctly what I needed to do, which was to refuse to go to Vietnam, to refuse to be part of trying to drown the liberation struggle of the Vietnamese people in blood, and to go to jail, because that's what they did to me when I refused. What helped me to do that was the fact that there was a powerful movement of resistance in this country. And I always make a big point of saying, somebody in the Black Panther Party pulled me aside and said, ain't no black man got no good reason to go to Vietnam and kill yellow men for this white supremacist system. And that had a big impact on me, but that was happening in the midst of a very broad, very determined, very powerful movement of resistance. And there were a lot of white people in that movement. You know, when I was out on the West Coast trying to figure out a way to avoid going to jail and going to Vietnam, I hung out with people who were involved in this movement. It was up in the Seattle area. And I remember the nights spent, well, we got high. That was part of what we did. But we also would listen to music, we'd talk, and there was just a feeling in the air of, we're all outlaws in the eyes of America. It was in the culture, it was in the music, you know, and we just kick back, listen to the music, talk about how we were going to move the struggle forward. And there was this widespread sense among a lot of people of different nationalities, including a whole lot of white people, that they weren't with this system, and in fact were part of fighting against it, and many of them wanted to bring it down. So we need to bring forward a better breakdown among the people, and especially bring a lot of white people over to get into this resistance. Because you can't take an approach of, well, maybe it won't be so bad for me, so then that means it's okay. Because that's wrong on two counts. The first and most important count that it's wrong on is that this is about humanity and what it means for humanity. And you can't say, I don't see it hitting me right now, so let's roll with it, because you're condemning humanity to continue suffering this. And then we got to take to heart something from the 1930s from Pastor Niemöller, who talked about when they came for the communists, I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. And he worked through the groupings of people, socialist, trade unions, Jewish people, lesbian, gay people, others who were targeted by the fascist regime of that time. And that calculation of, hey, it's not hitting me right now, can be one that sets you up to be hit farther down the line. We have to stand up. We have to refuse to accept the fascist onslaught that is in the air, coming down, being unleashed right now. We have to stand up, we have to fight that. And look, we in the Revolutionary Communist Party are going to be in the midst of that fight. We're going to be standing together with everyone else who wants to take this shit on and fight to stop it. And we're going to be bringing forward what humanity needs in the course of that fight. And what humanity needs is an actual revolution, one that overthrows this imperialist system, gets rid of it, and brings into being a totally different and far better way for people to live. So thank you, Sister Devota.
Okay. I mentioned fundraising. One of the things we're raising money for, and that when Arturo Farrell is going to be here, it's going to be the inauguration of our new performance space. Not that I'm ready to perform today, but it will be a big stage where we could put a table on it so that for those times when we come to speak here with lots of books, we can actually lay them out on the table. So you're going to have to forgive me, including that there's a microphone here. There's several things that I want to comment on. I want to thank Carl for that, and for especially for this is very visceral. This is very real, and it's not going to do any good. We should not lose our sense of humor, but it's not going to do any good to make a joke out of this. Okay? I see in the audience today a lot of people I don't know, but I also see some people in the audience who I stood with and worked very hard with at the beginning days of the Bush regime. And I want to say I'm really glad to see you here. Because once again, we have to stand against a fascist regime, and we were talking then about Christian fascists, which is what the Bush regime concentrated, along with a bunch of neocons, with the Christian fascists being the most dynamic factor. Here it's not neocons, it's this Trump xenophobia, this Trump program in unity with the Christian fascists. Make no mistake of who Mr. or Vice President Pence is. But one thing you can learn about this is that in that terminology which we and others used at the turn of the 21st century, Christian fascists, the dominant factor was the fascism. And that's the hypocrisy of those people. Trump stands against, and his whole life is an embodiment of everything that they're opposed to, except that bottom line of a fascist approach and a racist, white supremacist, misogynist approach, which is at the root, the patriarchy is at the root of that religious fundamentalism. So I just wanted to make that point, because this is he's managed to cohere. Yes, they're going to fight like rats, but they're also cohered around a very serious program. And it wasn't that different with Hitler. Listen, that Donald Trump has been accepted as a legitimate heir to the leadership of this country should tell you and tell all of us about the extreme nature of the crisis that the rulers of this country face, that they would now coalesce around the Trump presidency and attempt to both ideologically drug people as well as to actually physically drag people into supporting for this. Give it a chance. Support. Yes, there's people in the ruling class who have been fighting against this in a certain framework, including that they've been threatened. And you're going to see them come on board, and you're already seeing the march on board, and you're already seeing the march on board of entertainers and all kinds of other people. That's why this flyer says, don't conciliate, don't accommodate. Because that is the road to collaboration, and it's not a fucking pretty road. So I want to say that. Listen to what Obama said. Obama spoke this is going to be or something quite close. This will be on RevCom in the morning. Obama spoke a profound truth when he said he and Trump were members of the same team and running a relay race. And the election was an intramural scrimmage to see who could best represent that team. But what is that relay race? A race for empire and world domination driven by the laws of this system, capitalism, imperialism. And what is that team? A team of empire and world domination through military might. A team of the new Jim Crow of mass incarceration, police murder, and genocidal persecution of black and brown people. A team of the subjugation of women. I just have to say something now. Fuck! I said I wouldn't say this. I know this. I know I said this on the phone, but fuck Dave Chappelle and making a joke out of grabbing the genitals of women just because the boss of the hotel says so. Okay, so I went back on what I said, okay, but because it makes me very angry. This isn't fucking funny, okay? This is a team of hounding and deporting immigrants and breaking up their families, a team of destroying the environment. I was talking to Travis Morales and Riley Ruiz of the Revolution Club yesterday on the phone. They're at Standing Rock, and it's cold, and they have no money, and please donate some money so we can keep them there. And I was saying, you know, should we come back? I said, no, you got to stay there. This could be the fucking front line of this thing. Oh, we've got some TV cameras. I have to watch my language. This is the front line of a struggle. He's appointed an energy transition person, an EPA transition person who is a climate denier as well as a lobbyist for the oil industry. The Canadian Premier has called him and said, let's go back on this Keystone pipeline. Let's greenlight it. And you think he even knows what Indian rights are, let alone is any intention of doing anything but overthrowing this? So when, on the 15th, people have been called upon to struggle in every city and stand with the people of Standing Rock. You should be out there then, and we have to figure out how more and more people can get out to Standing Rock. Okay. So this is what Obama said about this relay team. What other team could he mean? And why should we hope, as Obama told us to, that Trump's much more openly vicious and brutal squad of thugs should succeed in maintaining that team's domination? Is this our team? And most important, what are we going to do about it? Look, America was never great, and we have to act on that. We need to stop this fascist offensive, and we need to, from our perspective, overthrow this system and bring about something far better. And we have that far better. For those of you who haven't seen it, there's a Constitution for a New Socialist Republic in North America that's written by Bob Avakian. I really recommend that you get a copy and read it. And while you're at it, go get a copy of the U.S. Constitution and read that and see what the difference is of one that protects property rights and slavery and one that leads to the emancipation of humanity. But look, so I went and said this, America's never great. But let's also look at this, about who the founders of this country were. This is something that needs to be returned to, because you're already hearing from both the liberal media as well as the lunatic media about the great traditions of America, the passing the baton, the peaceful transition. Look, the founders of America, Washington, Hamilton, oh my God, this play. Washington, Hamilton, Jefferson, and the rest who signed the Constitution, they participated in a massive crime against humanity, the reinforcement and strengthening of the enslavement, torture, rape of millions of human beings, and the violent suppression of all who dared to rise up. And this crime stretched over 4 generations. The wealth that they plundered from the enslaved, grown on the lands the founders so bloodily stole from the Native American Indians whom they slaughtered, formed the foundation of their democracy and the basis for their greatness. That is the domination of the world. Trump is a fitting heir to this, and they have accepted him. The question is, will we? Okay, so as I said before, there's a coherent ideology to fascism, even as it has lots of internal contradictions to it. It's a form of rule for the ruling class that discards many of the bourgeois democratic rights that people are accustomed to, which is generally the preferred form through which capitalist classes like to rule, and including the role of elections, where they basically pre-select the questions that will be up for consideration, the terms of the debate, and they get the people to make a choice between which one of the elites they're going to put their rubber stamp on. And then when each of these elites screws the masses in different ways, they say, well, what are you going to do? People voted for him. You've got to accept the result. So people are getting played and played again in a game of three-card Monte without ever actually being able to see beneath the surface and that this system isn't in their interest. That's why Bob Avakian, as I said, who's developed the new synthesis of communism and is the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, has said that in a world marked by profound class divisions and social inequality, to talk about democracy without talking about the class nature of that democracy and which class it serves is meaningless and worse. And I'll just editorialize. We're going into the worse. So long as society is divided into classes, there can be no democracy for all. One class or another will rule, and it will uphold and promote that kind of democracy which serves its interests and goals. The question is which class will rule and whether its rule and its system of democracy will serve the continuation or the eventual abolition of class divisions and the corresponding relations of exploitation, oppression, and inequality. So this is what's the unity between these two contending factions at the top of our society. Okay? There is a unity. Okay, we'll talk a little bit of dialectical materialism here, which is the science of revolution. There is a unity of opposites between the form of bourgeois democracy and its opposite in this fascist form of rule, which is where they're headed. You can see already in the Trump program the willingness to discard the trappings of bourgeois democracy. You know, how many commentators say, oh, he's willing, well, that's against the Constitution. That's not our precedent. And well, don't bother me with the details. We got work to do here to make America great. Don't think he won't do that. Okay? Just don't think he won't do that. Don't think that, I have to say, here's where you do get played. I was very, moved last night in a not a good way, thinking about the immigrants in this country and all those people who signed up to be dreamers. Guess who has their names and addresses now? And guess what he's going to do with that? This is serious stuff. A bourgeois fascist dictatorship is a qualitatively worse form of rule than a bourgeois democratic dictatorship in terms of what this means for the masses of people broadly and for the entire society and for the vanguard party itself. As Carl was reading before from Pastor Niemöller, first they did come from the communists. And this is going to be a very important thing that all of you are going to have to be thinking about. You say, well, I'm not a communist. I like revolution books. These people seem okay, but I'm not a communist, so if they come after them, okay. No, it's not okay, because that trajectory leads somewhere. Okay? And right now, if you go to revcom.us today, you'll see where in Chicago, in the protest, the police consciously went out and attacked the revolutionary communists. They went and picked these people up who are been out there leading the struggle, actually in the streets of Chicago, to try and stop our youth from fighting each other and instead to fight the system, which is something they don't want to happen because it's very useful for them, thank you, Rudy Giuliani, to make continued use of the fact that you've left these youth, you've left our kids with no choice but to get involved in this vicious drug trade, and one that you've spread from here to El Salvador and creating room for these gangs. And this is where I can go all night on this, I promise I won't. But this is on them. But they put it on us and tell us that this is the best that these people can do when it's their fault, and we've got to get out there and unite people right now against this. But my main point here is it's the communists who are in there trying to lead this fight. And so that it really matters to defend them. So, There is a difference between a bourgeois fascist form of rule and a bourgeois democratic form of rule. But this does not mean that we should fight to bring back that bourgeois democratic form of rule. We should fight every damn measure that they take. We should fight to drive these people out, the fascists and the Trump regime, which is starting soon. But at the same time, we need to be building the fight for a radically new society. And the reason that we don't want to restore the old regime of November 7th is for two reasons. First, because the bourgeois dictatorship in its democratic form is also a horror for the masses of people here and around the world. And second, and tied up with that, is that because you've not broken through the dynamic in which fascism was a solution, it could be a solution again. Okay? To the bourgeoisie, fascism is a matter of taste, but to the masses, it is not. And that's an important distinction. And we want to unite very broadly with everybody of conscience, everybody who wants a different future for humanity, to stand in the fight against what's going down now. At the same time, don't tell us not to talk about communism or revolution. Don't tell us that if we talk about Bob Avakian, it's going to make you nervous. Get over it. Okay? Because there's a question here of, we'll unite around what we will unite around, but it is going to matter that there's a force out there that's bringing to people the reality of this system in the midst of this. Even as we have always stayed true, for those of you who I haven't seen in a while, and we were on the same barricades, so to speak, in the early days of the Bush regime, I think we were always consistent in saying what we mean and meaning what we say and being consistent with our principles on that. So let me go back to this, I'm just looking at the clock here, this leaflet. Very quickly here, I do want to reiterate that it says fascism is a serious thing. It feeds on and encourages the threat and the use of violence to build a movement and come to power. And once in power, it essentially eliminates traditional democratic rights. It attacks, jails, and executes its opponents and launches violent mob attacks on minorities. Carl brought out that this is already starting. And in Nazi Germany in the 1930s and the 40s under Hitler, fascism did all these things. They imprisoned millions in concentration camps. They exterminated millions of Jews, Roma people, and other undesirables. And Hitler did almost all of this through established institutions and the rule of law, because this is where this goes. And yes, he could talk graciously when he felt it would serve his interests and fool his opponents, or lull his opponents is what it actually says. So these are things that we actually have to take very seriously, and we do mean it. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept this fascist America. So I have a number of other things here, but I'm going to try and get to a few other points. Well, actually, Carl did me a favor here, because he read that Pastor Niemöller quote, which is what I was just going to do, and I was going to update it, but I think Carl indicated you can fill in the blanks for yourself and substitute for trade unions, the Muslims, the immigrants, all these other questions. I want to say that we'll do a program around this, but I think it's important for us to get into the roots of this fascism in America, the particular formations, the political formations that come out of America, out of World War II, then America. After the 60s, the rise of Reagan and Christian fundamentalism as a political force in America, and how that got concentrated in a first very sharp contention during the Clinton administration. One of the things we have on the RevCom website, and which we're going to try to make available here in a printed form, is a piece by Bob Avakian in 98, I believe, called Bob Avakian on the Right-Wing Agenda, The Truth About the Right-Wing Conspiracy and Why Clinton and the Democrats Are No Answer. If you read this, it's like, this is just about 20 years old. It's incredibly prescient to the social formations that were cohering in this country between, on the one hand, these Christian fascists and neocons that were developing, and how the Democrats were taking this up. See, that's one of the things about Clinton, is that he's the one who ended welfare as we know it. As we know, during the campaign, many of us, not just the revolutionary communists, everybody was citing her comments on calling the youth predators, their role in accelerating mass incarceration. Their whole program was very, very right-wing, but it wasn't right-wing enough for the fascists. See? And so they had the contract on America. They went and took the Congress. They put him up for impeachment. I mean, not that there's anything other than disgusting in what he did, but it wasn't that atypical of U.S. presidents, let's just put it that way. So what this was actually about was something else. And this thing has then continued and taken a different form then with George W. Bush. And then you had this Obama, things were really getting out of hand. You had this Obama phenomenon, what Avakian called the Trump card that they played, which was very effective at lulling the movements of resistance, basically decimated them and had everybody cheering and thinking we're, well, maybe not post-racial, but well, look at all the progress we're making, all of which will be, by the way, undone in about 100 days, starting January 21st, because a lot of it had to be done by executive order. So you have to see that there's very intense fighting at the top of the ruling class. And one section of this ruling class will not hesitate and has not hesitated in mobilizing its social base. In other words, these were huge rallies Trump held. And he said that's what he wants to continue to do as president. Let somebody else do the nitpicky work of governing. But he wants to continue this base. This base is enraged, and they have no problem mobilizing it, not only out in the streets, but actually up and down through the military and school boards and all around the country. But the Democrats will never mobilize their social base outside the bounds of electoral politics. They'll never do that because they're afraid of the actual interests of the masses of black and Latino and white people of conscience, not to mention the Native Americans and people from around the world. They will never mobilize that. And this is why they're constantly conciliating to them. So another point Avakian made is if you try to make the Democrats what they are not, you will end up becoming more what they actually are. And that's worth thinking about right now, because we're seeing that process going on right now as people are finding common ground. You find common ground with the fascists, you end up in Vichy. This is where in France, where there were collaborators with the Nazi regime after they invaded. So look, I want to commend this piece on the right-wing conspiracy. Avakian said, our goal is the radical transformation of society and the world to eliminate all oppressive and exploitive relations among the people, and to bring about, as the final goal, a freely associating community of human beings worldwide. And the morals and ideology we uphold and strive to apply are in accordance with that objectives. And this is completely opposed to, he was saying then, the Christian fascists, and at the same time to all forms and expressions of bourgeois rule and bourgeois ideology. But we also recognize, and consistent with our outlook and principles, that there is a need and a basis to build broad unity and struggle against what has been referred to as the politics of poverty, punishment, and patriarchy, and in general against the ways in which the masses of people in the U.S. and throughout the world are subjected to oppression and plunder. So after the program or during the discussion, we do want to talk with everybody here for the ways that we can actually collaborate on this and actually struggle over what is the problem and solution in the course of standing together and fighting against this program. So the other thing I want to commend to you before wrapping up is a pamphlet that you can see I've read a few times. It's called The Coming Civil War and the Polarization and Repolarization for Revolution in the Current Era. There's some very important articles there, including on the history and how to understand the history of Weimar Germany, and you can see a lot of this playing out right now. I don't know who was watching TV this morning and saw Giuliani, that ghoul, talking about, in answer to the question, is he going to, assuming he's Attorney General, would they prosecute Hillary Clinton? And basically what he said, he laid out a bunch of options, and the take-home message is, it's an option. And this is what they do. In other words, it's true that first they'll come for the revolutionaries, but at the same time they'll be constantly going after it within their own ranks, and that's no reason either, without defending anything that she stands for and represents, of not letting them do what they're going to do, because it's part of a whole program to impose a whole different cohering norm. And we can talk more in the discussion today, and we got 65 days where we can talk even more about what are the underlying economic factors that give rise to this. What is, those jobs aren't coming back, okay? No matter what Donald Trump says. This is a factor of capitalism and globalization and mechanization and modernization, these kinds of things. This is the workings of the system. But these are the kinds of things, maybe last week, you were thinking about getting a ticket finally to see Hamilton. This week, you got to start thinking about why the hell are we facing this, and confronting it for real, and then getting down and taking care of business, because this business is what we have to do. So I want to wrap up here and just say that the point of this leaflet is to get it out in huge quantities. You are given complete permission. You don't have to get a copyright. Reproduce this, send this around. Let us know what you think of it. I believe that this or something very similar to this needs to be published as ads in newspapers, and very, very soon. Okay? We have to set a course for people to recognize what is happening. And we have to have this fight over that what is going on is not okay. Okay, we had a first version of a flyer out the night of the election at 5 a.m. before we got this written, and I heard that Bill Moyers read that at Union Theological Seminary. It's not okay, and so then we have to act on it. So I also want to say, in addition to programs at Revolution Books, if any of you teach in high schools or middle schools or in college, if any of you are students in colleges, universities, seminaries, or at your church, mosque, synagogue, teach-ins. We need to have a lot of teach-ins now, okay? People do not know what fascism is. People do not even know a big word like xenophobia. I'm not saying they have to know the word, but they do have to know what it means. They have to understand what's actually underway here. And we have to have a lot of that kind of discourse. And I hope, and my plan is for Revolution Books to be at the center of that. You have a question about what's going on, call the bookstore and say, I want to come lead a discussion. I want to be part of a discussion. We'll set it up. We need a center of radical and revolutionary discourse. This is it, okay? We're here. That's our purpose. And let's get going now. So I think what Carl and I'd like to do is take your questions. We did have a bunch of questions that I'm trying to find, but not with any success. So do you remember what they are that we thought things that we've heard? Well, one is, should we find common ground with him? Should we give him a chance, as Chappelle said last night? I mean, those are questions. Here's another question that comes up, a point that I think Carl spoke to, or maybe I made the point. Well, this is from some black people, well-intentioned, strong people, but they nonetheless said, we've been through slavery, or we've been through Jim Crow, we're going through the new Jim Crow, we'll get through this too. Maybe you white people won't know how to get through this. Well, two things, okay. I can sort of see the second part of that, the point of people needing to cast away illusions and prepare for struggle who haven't had to struggle. But I do want to say that we should get into this question in this discussion, because this is not run-of-the-mill Jim Crow or new Jim Crow. This is serious business. Like I said in the Claudia Kuntz book, she makes the point that this becomes not us against them, but us without them, the them being people who are already incarcerated and in camps, if you want to put it that way, by the millions, and who are being shot in the streets by the police, and actually shooting each other because of the way this system works. So don't think they can't, as Carl has pointed out for almost 2 decades now, that they can't go from a slow genocide to a fast one under changing conditions. So these are the kinds of things, these are a few of the questions. You had another one that we were going to talk about, that we wanted to suggest?
look, the thing about, oh, Mike, turn it on, please. I mean, it relates to some of what you've already raised, but he's the president. Don't you have to respect the integrity of the electoral process and the continuing of it? And why are we saying he's illegitimate? He did win the election, didn't he?
Yeah. So that's an important point that we should talk about. And just by the way, it is true that we have to deal with this phenomenon of the white people who did vote for him. But as we say in the leaflet, that he even got more than 5 or 10% of the vote. That's a cause for concern. But the bigger question is, what were the choices? Not just that they were two bad candidates, but that the elections themselves are not the arena through which we, the people, have any real initiative. It's actually an arena into this system through which people are constantly being played. And the fact that they would consider it legitimate. I mean, look, this motherfucker was legitimated over 18 months. There was plenty of time to call out who this guy was. And don't think these people didn't know who he was. And they just, oh, gee, I didn't know this. Because, you see, for a moment when they were all in shock that their polls were wrong, they started speaking some truth. But then pretty much the line came down the next morning. That's not what we're saying. This is what we're saying. What makes America great is a peaceful transition of presidencies, which is really, at this point, must not be a peaceful transition to a fascist form of rule. So with that...